lovely Tom will go first for about 25 minutes. Then Jerry will come up and put his point of view across. We're going to have about a 5-minute break and then come back for the rebuttals and then Q&A as well. So now I'd like to introduce the chair of this evening, Dr. David Luke.
Hello everybody, thank you Amy, who is concerned about her masters, which I'm her supervisor, so that's why I'm doing it. I'm also current chair of Breaking Convention, which we're hosting here obviously in a couple of days' time. Actually, when's it start? Friday, so you're all coming. If not, see you next time, so fantastic. So yes, we're going to have a nice clean debate tonight between our two contestants, Tom and Jerry. It'll be a bit of I didn't say anything, I just mentioned their names. It's going to be a bit of a kind of fungal cat and mouse. We know how that normally ends, right? But you know, we might see something a bit different tonight. Let's see how that goes.
No acne angles tonight.
Yeah, it's in Jerry's favour, I think, as far as the cartoons go, but it's going to be a little bit different in this contest. So, yeah, we're going to have an opening statement first of all from Tom, and then from Jerry, and then a rebuttal. Then we're going to have a bit of a break, and then we're going to come back, we're going to give their closing statements, and we'll open up Q&A with everybody. So just by way of introduction, first of all, Tom is the author of this book, The Witch's Ointment, The Secret History of Psychedelic Magic. A fantastic book. There's not many books on the topic of psychedelics and magic, and there should be more, but this one is rather excellent. It's also got a new book out as well. And Tom is also the founder and director of what's called Sanctum Psychedelia, which is not a psychedelic society that was a kind of harm reduction in education and all things group like that. And then on the other side of the rabbit hole or rat trap is going to be Jerry Brown, who's an anthropologist, an academic, and he has written this fantastic book, The Psychedelic Gospels, The Secret History of Hallucinogens in Christianity. You'll notice that there are both secret histories of psychedelics in either witchcraft or in Christianity, and we're going to pit their skills against each other. So without further ado, I'll start banging on, and we'll take it over to our first contestant. Give a round of applause, please, to Thomas Hatsis.
Okay, thank you all for being here this evening. Seriously, this is amazing. I want to also thank my amazing partner Eden for taking this journey with me, both here to England and in this crazy, absurd, and beautiful life. I'd like to thank Amy for doing a great job in the midst of the chaos that is running and setting up Breaking Convention, taking the time out to do this. Thank you so much. And of course, yes. And of course, to our distinguished moderator, David Luke. Yes. And I especially want to thank Julie and Jerry. Now, one thing I want to make sure I said tonight is this. Jerry and I are going to disagree with each other a lot this evening. That's why you all showed up. However, there is nothing but love, respect, and friendship between the two of us. And notwithstanding mushrooms and Christian art, Jerry and I agree on a host of other areas of psychedelic history, anthropology, and spirituality. This is actually, Jerry, my third public debate on this topic. So this will be 3 public debates, right? 2 podcast debates, and how many debates over dinner? I've lost count, but there's been a few. And usually the subject of those dinner time debates rests around the very question we are met here tonight to address: whether or not Christians painted mushrooms in their art throughout the ages. Now let me just say right off the top, in the grand tradition of people named Thomas, I doubt it. However, it was not too long ago when I lived in Milano, Italy, and my mom came out to visit me. Now my mom is always down for an adventure. So we spent a long weekend visiting various Duomos in Florence and Venice, and underground pizza joints in Lake Como, desperately looking for mushrooms in Christian art, taking pictures of things that I once believed to be mushrooms. but no longer do. So Mom was right. Of course, Mom is always right. The point is, there was a time in my life when I would have argued in favor of everything Jerry is going to say tonight. Now, I would not have argued it as gracefully, or with as much intelligence, wit, and charm, maybe charm, but I would have certainly argued in favor of it. Now, before I get into the supposed mushroom art of Europe, I'd like to start on the other side of the world and show you all some images that I'm sure you're all familiar with. These are mushroom statues from the Mayan civilization that once inhabited the area we today call Guatemala. Let me tell you what I like about these statues. I like that I don't have to guess whether or not those are mushrooms, because we have corroborating evidence that proves that they're mushrooms. And what I mean by corroborating evidence is this. We don't just have these statues, we also have the Popol Vuh, a document that describes mushroom use among the Mayan society, the very society that produced these stones. We also have the writings of those like Bernardino de Sahagún, whose La Historia Universal de las Cosas de Nueva España records the mushroom use among the Aztecs. There's also the Codex Magliavecchiano, which addresses the mushroom, tobacco, and peyote use of the Aztecs. What I'm saying is we have corroborating evidence. So when we look at these statues, we can say with relative certainty, they're probably mushrooms. History deals in probabilities. Now, De Sahagún's work in the Codex Magliavecchiano offer us something unique that unfortunately none of the images Jerry is going to show you tonight will be able to match. These are what mushrooms look like when drawn by Christians. These are the only mushrooms in Christian art you're going to see tonight. You see, both of these images come with accompanying text that verifies that these are mushrooms. No such evidence exists for the holy mushroom in Europe. There's not a diary entry, or a letter, a chronicle, a treatise, a proclamation, a gospel, anything to substantiate that people were painting mushrooms in Christian art. Now, there are different ways the advocates excuse this deafening lack of corroborating evidence. The conspiracy theorists will tell you that the mushroom was covered up by an elite group of power-hungry priests who have jealously guarded this secret for nigh 2,000 years, and that's why there's no evidence. Now, Jerry doesn't go for the conspiracy stuff, and good for him, because conspiracies of that magnitude never actually work out in history. Jerry has a different idea. Jerry doesn't think the mushroom was covered up at all. Painting mushrooms in Christian art, according to the Browns, was just a way for educated Christians to teach illiterate Christians the stories of Jesus. Well, if that's true, why wasn't this written down anywhere? Jerry doesn't go for the conspiracy stuff, but in my opinion, he does skirt a line when he suggests that, while the mushroom wasn't covered up, it was still too sacred to write about. Really? You could paint them in art, but you couldn't write about it? That requires one heck of a good explanation, and I hope Jerry provides it tonight. But you see, it might not even matter. In my own research, and I have 3 chapters on this in my book, Psychedelic Mystery Traditions, I've come to realize that Christians had no problem writing about their psychedelic experiences, and in some cases created whole mystery traditions out of them. Let's take, for example, the anonymous Trúpater Hohelied, dating to around 1160, which offers us Christian psychedelic mystery symbolism with the entheogen mandrake. No cover-ups or special pleading required. It reads, "The bark of mandrake brings intoxication. This root denotes God, the image of whom is Christ, for he is a medicine and a security for eternal life. The root's bark is the Holy Ghost, and he is the intoxicating drink." Too sacred to write about? I don't have time to offer more examples. I have, like I said, 3 chapters in my book. The point is, Christians did not cover this up at all. They were very candid about their psychedelic use. You see, Jerry and I actually agree that medieval Christians were familiar with psychoactive plant materials. There's no debate there. There's a solid history, in fact. So the areas I want to address tonight will all revolve around history. Because you see, there is a big problem in history that makes the holy mushroom hypothesis impossible. You see, holy mushroom advocates never bring up the Protestant Reformation and how bloody and brutal that was. They don't mention the Hussite uprising. They don't mention the crusade against the Cathars or the Inquisition against the Waldensians. They don't mention anything from Christian history that was so bloody and brutal. As you all know, the Christian story is one of tremendous upheaval and human devastation. And yet, what Julie, Jerry, and anyone who supports this idea is asking us all to believe is this: that as much as the clergy disagreed on every jot and tittle, bickering like children over every level of Christian doctrine, oftentimes leading to violence, sometimes leading to murder, what Jerry wants us to believe is that somehow these power-hungry, frustratingly celibate men all agreed we should not talk about the holy mushroom. And we especially better make sure that we don't leave any writing so as to even teach artists how to do this properly. I ask you, my colleagues, peers, and friends, how historically probable is that? There isn't any room for the holy mushroom in Christian history if you know this much about Christian history. The holy mushroom fits into the Christian drama as easily as McDonald's fits into the Inquisition. With this in mind, let's get into the European art. The mushroom in Christian art hypothesis rests on a foundational image, the only image that John Marco Allegro, the guy who invented this whole idea, ever advanced to support his claims in his book, The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross. But Allegro actually doesn't say much about the image at all, dedicating nothing more than a few sentences to it. In fact, Allegro wrote 6 more books after The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross and never again brought up mushrooms in Christian art. His daughter wrote a biography of the man and his work and says, rather conclusively, that Allegro believed none of this by the end of his life. We probably shouldn't either. Now, the image in question is the infamous fresco at Plancroft Chapel in Meringue, France. Now, since the entire mushroom and Christian art hypothesis rests on this image, I'm going to offer you a friendly challenge. To those of you here who believe this to be an Amanita muscaria mushroom and have an open mind, you don't have to identify yourselves, I'm going to make a prediction. In 10 minutes, nothing Jerry or anyone on this planet says will be able to convince you that this is a mushroom. Because in 10 minutes, you're going to know more about this image than everybody that's not in this room right now. So to get there, we have to start not with this image, but with the entire Chapel de Plancroft. Because I don't think enough attention has been placed on the context of the building that housed this image. We tend to see it in a vacuum, right? We see it as just this one piece. But it's actually part of a larger group of frescoes. Okay? So let's take a look at those. Along with this famous one, there's one of Jesus' scourging, the crucifixion, the Pieta, and Jesus surrounded by the 4 evangelists. But that's not all there is. There's also one of St. Eloi shoeing a horse and one of Reinhard the Fox, who is a popular, secular, medieval folk character. These all represent medieval plays. Now, one of the points the Browns stress in their book is that Pope Gregory wanted to use art to teach the stories of Jesus to the illiterate masses. And they are absolutely correct. Pope Gregory did want to do that. However, what they miss is that Pope Gregory wasn't talking about art like the stuff we hang on walls. He was talking about plays, theater. And 3 of the kinds of plays that developed out of this idea were called the mystery play, the morality play, and the miracle play. And those 3 plays were often seen in conjunction, which is the case at Plancroft. Reinhard the Fox represents the morality play. St. Eloi is the miracle play, and the Eve and Adam and Jesus frescoes show one of the most popular plays of medieval times, The Mystery of the Paradise Tree. Now, we have the scripts to this play. And you know what the scripts call this object, or that tree-looking thing? A tree. Okay, so if Jerry or anybody else can produce for us even one script from medieval times that mentions the holy mushroom, the debate's over. I've lost. So with an understanding of the historical context of these frescoes, let's zero in on our guest of honor, the tree. As you all know, many psychonauts claim that this looks too much like an Amanita muscaria to be anything else. Does it really? Let's start from the ground up, right, and play in the dirt. So see at the bottom here, there's that hill that it's growing out of, right? Amanita muscaria mushrooms do not grow out of the ground like that. They retain the vulva from which they spring. They look like this, Eden and I go picking these mushrooms in the fall, and just like I'm sure we have some foragers in this room, none of us have ever seen an Amanita muscaria grow out of the ground without its vulva. Now moving up, we see those protrusions, right? The kinds of protrusions found on the Amanita muscaria, of course. No, they're not. No mushroom has smaller mushrooms growing out the side like that. Then we get to the top, there's two additional branches holding up the canopy there. You'll know where I'm going with this, I'm sure. Mushrooms don't have branches. So when people say this looks like an Amanita muscaria, they're really referring to the top, right? The dome shape of the top and the white spots. The only features of this image that can conceivably be mistaken for the mushroom. But believe it or not, both of those features have historically contextual, natural explanations that have nothing to do with mushrooms, or conspiracies, or special pleading. Let's start with the dome top. Here we have to go deep into history to find its origins. Now, 2 years ago, I was actually coincidentally at Breaking Convention, and I had the honor of smoking a joint on my way to the British Museum with Sir Michael Crowley. And at one point, when we were at the British Museum, I saw something in an Assyrian relief that looked very familiar to me. So I pulled out my camera and I snapped that picture. Look familiar? That is the parasol of victory. Please take note of the nub at the top and the tassels hanging out the bottom, as they are crucial for understanding the evolution of this design throughout history. While not a common symbol today, the parasol of victory was very popular in both the ancient and medieval worlds. From Assyria and Babylonia, it made its way into Herodian coinage. As we all know, the Herodians were a bunch of power-hungry assholes. And then after that, it made its way into Rome as a status symbol. Now, even after the fall of the Roman Empire, the parasol of victory still made its way into Christian Europe, as we see with this crucial illumination depicting the canonization of Henry II as it appears in the Regensburg Sacramentary from the late 10th century. Now, you'll notice that as Jesus crowns Henry, the angel is handing him off the parasol of victory, complete with the cross at the top. Sorry, it's a little grainy here. This is now a symbol of Christ's reign over all humankind. Now, around the same time, we get this image here from St. Bernard's Door of Salvation. This is an image the Brown Jews in their book. But it should be very obvious to see that that's actually a parasol top. You can still see the nub at the top and the tassels hanging out the bottom. In fact, there are 2 tiers of tassels. As time would go on, these tiers of tassels would actually evolve into leaves, which is very obvious when we look at this illumination of the Lord of the Unicorn from the MS Bodleian 602. Still has the nub at the top, and the leaves, the tassels have artistically evolved into leaves. Okay, as this went on throughout the centuries, sometimes the nub appears but not the tassels, and other times you'll get the tassel leaves but not the nub. As we see with this image of blind Bartimaeus, see there's no nub but the tassel leaves, and this one from MS Bodleian 602, this is folio 27V showing the lore of the salamander. You can see the red nub at the top, but there are no tasseled leaves. But the most damning for the mushroom hypothesis is this. There's a text from the 1490s called the Ratisbon manuscript, and these kinds of trees also turn up. Now, I've been unable to get my hands on this manuscript, but a guy named C.F. Gordon Cummings did in the late 1800s, and in his own work reproduced some of the images he saw from the earlier text. And here they are, the tree-shaped umbrellas, not mushrooms, umbrellas. We can only presume that that's what they were called in the earlier manuscripts. Now, the parasol theory doesn't just topple the plain coral fresco. Most every dome-top looking tree that some advocate will show you of this idea will suffer the same fate as we saw with St. Bernard's Door of Salvation, the Lord of the Salamander, and almost every image Jerry's about to show you. Now, finally, on to the spots. What could those possibly be if not Amanita muscaria spots? Well, remember earlier when I talked about that mystery play, The Mystery of the Paradise Tree? That play was about the fall of Eve and Adam and overcoming temptation and original sin through faith in Jesus. This play would be performed on the feast day of Eve and Adam. Anybody know when the feast day of Eve and Adam is? I know you. Other than Jerry? You actually all do it, you just know it by its modern name. Christmas Eve. And as part of this tradition of this play of the Paradise Tree, you would hang communion wafers on the branches. That's what those actually are, okay? And we know this because there's the solid history for this. This is the story of that play. The tree begins as the tree of temptation. You put the communion wafers on the branches, the Savior's born, bada boom, bada bing, the tree becomes the tree of paradise. And now when we look at the tree as a whole, from the bottom, that's missing the vulva. By the way, those spots at the top are breakoffs of the vulva. If you don't have a vulva at the bottom, there's no way that you could have spots at the top. Hard to imagine a Christian mushroom enthusiast missing that detail. So we have no vulva, we have the branches hanging out the sides, and now understanding the culturally contextual, natural history of both the dome shape and the spots, we can say with relative certainty, it's probably not a mushroom. It's probably a tree. And you can even see, it's a little difficult here, it still retains the leaf lines that used to be tassels. Well, if you look at this, if you Google this image, everybody got rid of them because it completely kills the idea that this is a mushroom. Mushrooms don't have leaves. Jerry and Julie are honest, so they left them in there, and that's what actually cracked this entire case for them. So thank you for that. Now, as my time winds down, let me just say that this opening statement comes with some spoilers. I'm going to tell you everything Jerry's about to do, and I want you to watch it. By asking yourself 3 basic questions. Number 1, is Jerry offering any corroborating evidence for his claims, or is he just saying, this is a mushroom, please believe me? Number 2, are those mushrooms, or are those parasols? And number 3, is Jerry placing each of those images in their proper historical context the way I just did with plain fresco? No. All the evidence he's going to bring to the table is going to stem from art historians from the 20th century and unsubstantiated claims about the story of Genesis from thousands of years ago. But when the bulk of this art was created during the 12th, 13th, 14th centuries, he's not going to mention anything from that time. Guaranteed. I hope I'm wrong about all of that. I really do. But I'm just getting warmed up. So thanks for listening. Thank you.
We have, let's write something for a literate audience, and let's get these ideas out. We are obviously not the first people to have come up with an idea that Christianity has a psychedelic history. I think we're the first people to have done this kind of in-depth anthropological and interdisciplinary fieldwork to try to make the case for the modern audience. I want to thank Tom for initiating this debate series because I think we've both gotten a lot more attention to our work than we would have staying in our own little cubby holes. Freud said there are 6 people in every sexual act: the 2 partners and their parents. Perish the thought. But if you're spending thousands of dollars and years of therapy to work that one through, I would say there are 4 people in this debate. There's Tom Hatsis, medieval historian, myself, an anthropologist, R. Gordon Wasson. How many of you have heard of him? Excellent. The father of modern ethnomycology, who Jonathan Ott called a 20th century Darwin, and also John Marco Allegro, who 2 years after Wasson wrote in 1968, Soma, Divine Mushroom of Immortality, put out The Sacred Mushrooms and the Cross, which destroyed his career. It was already shaky since he broke with the team and put out information on the Dead Sea Scrolls before other people wanted him to, but that destroyed his career. What I'm going to demonstrate tonight is that both Gordon Wasson, who denied there were any mushrooms in Christian art, in fact he argued in Soma that evidence for mushrooms, entheogens, psychedelics in the Near and Middle East ended 1,000 years before Christ. And Tom, who takes the same position, is that they both, in their own ways, have hidden critical evidence. And in Tom's case, has grossly misrepresented our work. And I don't say that lightly to my friend, but I'm going to show you with quotes from Psychedelic Mystery Traditions, his book here. Everything I have to say, I'm going to give you a few images today as Tom did. We have multiple images, color photos that Julie took of psychedelics, both, not only Amanita muscaria, as Tom says, is the main one, but of also psilocybe-containing mushrooms in the churches and cathedrals that we visited. Everything I'm going to say today will be found in a long article called Entheogens in Christian Art, Wasson, Allegro, and the Psychedelic Gospels that will be published in the peer-reviewed Journal of Psychedelic Studies, either right at the end of this month. And the special issue will be called Psychedelics in History and World Religion. Tom has not put any of these claims that he's making through the peer review process. And we'll come back to that in a moment. I'm not here to win a debate. This is a big issue. Does Christianity have a psychedelic history that can be documented, both in text and or in images? And I will argue that it does. Is there imputed evidence, not as strong as the visual evidence, that these entheogens were around at the time of Jesus and the disciples? There is some, but that requires interpretation because it obviously is indirect. But then again, Jesus spoke in parables. Let's see, where's that clicker? Oh. Okay, I'm here because of my first LSD experience, Orange Sunshine High in the Rocky Mountains at a little gathering called the Rainbow Family Gathering that I think is still taking place in the United States. This was back in '73. Unlike Albert Hoffman on his first trip, I did not feel I was dying, but I was spun into a very paranoid world that lasted of sort of shamanism 101, power objects, power forces, and meeting people who did not seem to be real people, a la Cardinal Castaneda. I thought I was losing my mind. And I kind of withdrew from that world. I was moving into that because at that time in my life, I'd come out of a divorce, I'd come out of a big, powerful national social movement. I was kind of lost, and I desperately wanted to be important again. I wanted to be a shaman. I found out I have no talents for healing. I'm more of a researcher and a writer. And so I backed out of that. But being an academic, I decided, you know what? This is interesting. I didn't get my instant nirvana. I didn't get the things Leary was promising me. I want to learn a lot more about psychedelics. So I designed being a founding professor of anthropology at Florida International University in Miami. We wrote the catalog. So I was able to put this course, ANT 4461, Hallucinogens and Culture, into the catalog, where it's still being taught for credit today. It might be the first course ever for credit in the US. So I learned a lot about entheogens. I'm going to fast forward to 2006, where Julie and I took an anniversary trip to Scotland, and drawn by Dan Brown's mention of the Da Vinci in the Da Vinci Code, that Roslin Chapel, about 7 miles, 14 kilometers, I don't know if I have that correct, south of Edinburgh, was a possible resting place for the Holy Grail. We went there. Roslin is more Gaudi than Gothic, although it was created in the 15th century by St. William Sinclair. And it is a fusion of pagan and Catholic symbolism. Throughout Roslin are the heads sculpted of green men. There are over 100 of them, many of them connected by a sinuous vine that runs through Roslin Chapel. And you can go on and find 360-degree images of Roslin on the internet. I was fascinated with this image, which comes down from the ceiling on a 15-foot stone boss, and I bought a plaster replica of it. 2 weeks later, we're sitting in St. Andrews at Julie went in a restaurant. Julie went to the restroom. I turned the green man head around on the table and found I was looking at an Amanita muscaria mushroom in its different stages. The bulb, the veil, and the top with some raised dots on it. When we were writing the book, I presented this to Paul Stamets, one of the most eminent mycologists in the world. And Paul said, this is a taxonomically correct Amanita muscaria. And I said, and I'm kind of embarrassed about this, I said, Paul, are you sure? And it's kind of like asking the Pope, are you Catholic? And he said, I'm absolutely sure. May we quote you on that? Yes, you may. And it's in the book. And then he said, let me show you something. He pulled out his computer and he showed us the other mushroom images in Roslyn. Now, Tom says, this is reference to authority. I do not, and he says that's a logical fallacy. Well, a logical fallacy is a fallacious argument. Authority is, I have to have a root canal. I think I want to go to a dentist. Authority is, I want to get a divorce, which I don't. I think I will go to someone who's expert in that process. So, when there are people who have expertise, we should value that and give that some particular weight. It was after seeing this that Julie also saw the only inscription there inside Roslyn that was a reference to 2 Ezra in the Apocrypha, which is an absolute reference to an entheogenic experience. So this started our heads spinning. What is this Amanita muscaria mushroom doing in a Catholic church from the 15th century? Are there others out there? What is Sir William Sinclair trying to tell us? Is this something that's been embedded, secret, but not hidden or suppressed for anyone to see? Who had the eyes to see it? Because the theologians didn't see this in 500 years. The art historians, most of whom have no knowledge of mushrooms whatsoever, did not see it. And we wrestled with this for 6 years. Should we go out and leave Miami and try to go and document mushrooms in Christian art? And this is going to be controversial, it's going to be expensive, we don't know what we're going to find. And we finally came to the conclusion that if we do not do this, if we do not pick up what was given to us to look into, we would regret it the rest of our life. This is a map, it's in our book, of where we went. We went to England, Roslyn, we went to Canterbury, we went to Chartres number 3, we went to Plain Corault, we went to Saint-Sauvin, we went to St. Martin de Vic's church, we went to St. Michael's church done by Bishop Benoit, who became a saint of the Catholic Church. In Hildesheim, Germany, we went to Aquileia, we went to the Vatican Museums of Rome, we stopped in at Eleusis, of course, and then we also made some incredible findings that have never been reported before of Amanitas in the dark church of Gorome in Cappadocia, and also in the Alhara Valley. This is our original photograph taken in 2012 of the image at Plain Corault. Why is this image so seminal in the study of psychedelics and history? It is seminal because it was the turning point in the debate between R. Gordon Wasson, the father of modern ethnomycology, and John Marco Allegro, the author of The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross. And Allegro, whose main work in 141 pages of philological documentation at the end of his book to show the word roots that he had traced back to his theory that all of the Bible went back to a mushroom cult, which we disagree with. He presented this one image. And this was a debate between him and Wasson. His daughter, Judith Brown, who wrote a marvelous biography of him called John Marco Allegro, Maverick of the Dead Sea Scrolls, in her introduction to the 40th anniversary republication of The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, said, had John had more images, I believe his work would have been more credible. And I'm paraphrasing her at this particular time. So the question became for Wasson, how was he going to deal with this fly agaric in the ointment, which coming from this period would negate his very fundamental claim. And why did Wasson take that particular position? This is our enhanced, a software enhanced version of the Plain Corault image. Now, by enhancing, this was not altered. The colors were brought out and the contrast was brought out. And what we see here is, number one, there are two historical moments here because Eve is skeletonized. She is already transforming. So what we have here is the Garden of Eden story, the temptation, the mushroom tree, which is red, not purple or green, as Tom has claimed it is in some of the images that are out there. And this is an authentic image. You'll also notice that whatever Adam and Eve are covering themselves with, those are not the jagged shapes of fig leaves. They could be, although one cannot make that argument except for speculation, they could be the underside of the mushroom. What we see here is this is no more an anatomically correct mushroom than this is an anatomically correct Adam and Eve. Mushrooms grow in clusters, and we did not have depth of field or perspective yet in the ark, so we can certainly see this as a representation because you'll see there are the dots. Tom talks about the paradise tree in this play. But if you look up the paradise tree, you'll see that what they did was they hung in the play apples on branches. I do not see any branches up here where the dots of the Amanita muscaria mushroom are. Now, Wasson based his whole rejection of this Amanita muscaria on the letter of Erwin Panofsky, described as the most important art historian of the 20th century. And Panofsky said, this is one example, and since the style is very provincial, a particularly deceptive one, of a conventionalized tree type prevalent in Romanesque and early Gothic art, which art historians refer to as the mushroom tree, or in German, the Filzenbaum. What Wasson did never published, nor never revealed, was this second letter he received from Erwin Panofsky 10 days later. And this is the first time, because Julie and I dug this letter out of the Harvard University Herbarium, which has a whole Wasson archives. And we dug this letter out. And in this letter, Erwin Panofsky says, well, I could admit there is a possibility where you could see this as a mushroom if the transformation from pine tree had taken place and was accepted in art, especially some ignorant craftsmen may have misunderstood the finished project vis-a-vis the Filzenbaum. But even if he labored under this delusion, he would have admitted the branches. But I suggest again to you that these mushrooms grow in clusters, and that could be part of the veil, as Giorgio Sammarini has described it. Giorgio Sammarini, an eminent ethnobotanist who is presenting here at the breaking, has visited Plain Corral personally, has written on the mushroom tree of Plain Corral, and has also, mushrooms in Christian art, developed a typology of two kinds of mushroom trees found in Christian art. One is a Plain Corral type mushroom tree, the Amanita muscaria, semi-spherical foliage, a broad mushroom cap, dotted whitish, lateral ramifications that join the cap, and as you can see, it can represent the early stages of the fungus's development, and the roundish fruit of the tree held in the mouth of the serpent. There are also additional ramifications. This is from the Christ column, or more accurately, Bishop Renoir's millennial column, a 12-foot high by 2 feet plus round bronze column. Bishop Renoir was an excellent mathematician, church builder, and metallurgist. And in his progression of Christ's life from the bottom of the column up to the entry into Jerusalem, we see numerous examples of the Saint-Sauvin type mushroom, where you see the striated top and the nipple-like structure there, which Sammarini describes as the psilocybin-containing mushroom. Now, Tom's whole focus here has been on Amanita, and this is one of the distortions because half of the images we found were psilocybin-containing mushrooms, and half of them were Amanita muscaria. I like to stress that we only have a small sample of 9 churches and cathedrals, abbeys that we visited. And this is why we put forward this theory and called for a broader investigation of it. But here we have a downward shape. We have the trunk spreads out from several branches, the 3-lobed leaf, and at times it has a papilla, a nipple-like shape, which forms a point on the top. So, is this the parasol of victory, or is this the liberty cap mushroom? I would ask you. Now, here are, again, and forgive me for referring to authorities and experts in the field, here are a number of people who believe that this image at Plain Corrupt is an Amanita muscaria mushroom. Société Mycologique de France, when it was first presented there, said we have a fly agar. Erwin Panofsky changed his tune and admitted the possibility of Amanita muscaria in his 2012 letter. John Marco Allegro, one of the world's most famous ethnobotanists, Richard Evans Schultes and Albert Hoffman, in their comprehensive study of hallucinogenic plants, said this looks very much like an Amanita muscaria mushroom. Giorgio Samarini, the guidebook to the Chapelle de Plain Coral, 2000, Carl Rook and Mark Hoffman in The Effluence of Deity, who, by the way, do cite textual evidence of mushrooms in Christian and Judaic writings, and I will come to that in a little while. So Tom is wrong on that point. And of course, Jerry and Julie Brown in our book. 5 minutes. All right. 5 minutes. Tom has gone through many changes in describing this because he's trying to find a way to say it's not an Amanita. I ask you, this is the other part of the mystery play. Was this drawn by the same artist at the same time? Is this part of the same play? I leave that for you to conclude. This is St. Martin de Vic. It is 50 miles east of Plain Corrupt. And here you have again 2 historical moments. The prophet Isaiah, 700 years BC, receiving not burning coals as described in the Bible, but a rounded shape. And here's Christ entering Jerusalem, and here are 5 smooth, tan, Amanita, psilocybin mushrooms. Right in front of that, on the towers of Jerusalem, they're cutting down the psilocybin mushrooms. And right here, that towers of Jerusalem is over the Last Supper. The same knives used to cut down the mushrooms are on the table. And that's not bread, because if bread in that time would have been made in loaves and would have been ripped apart. And here, the artist has cleverly put, for the knowledgeable, for the eyes that can see, mushrooms into the hands of the disciples. Now, 2 questions. Why did Wasson refuse to acknowledge mushrooms in Christian art? It turns out, and this was reported by DeWitt Peterkin, Wasson was a banker, a very successful J.P. Morgan banker, before he got in with his wife Tina into ethnomycology. He worked at J.P. Morgan, he developed the field of international banking relations, and he had an audience with the Pope. This is the strong financial reason. I've done some investment banking consulting to supplement the poor teacher's earnings, and non-disclosure agreements are very common here. In fact, they are legally binding. Wasson's pension, his vested options could all be tied to honoring that legal and financial obligation that he had to J.P. Morgan, especially with such a visible and high sensitive client as the Vatican. So this is the reason. And Wasson came to this conclusion, and he was disingenuous. It is as if the chief climate denier worked for Exxon, was on Exxon's payroll, and refused to acknowledge it. And Wasson's view, Allegro, because of some unsupportable claims he made, even the philologists deny the accuracy of his work. He went down in flames and ridicule in the British press and all over the world. Watson's career soared. He wrote Soma. He wrote The Wondrous Mushroom in Mexico. He wrote with Carl Rook, Road to Eleusis, Finding the Ergot in the Eleusinian Mysteries. He talked about the Amanita muscaria searches among the Siberian reindeer herders. So this is the reason, and Wasson, his view as the preeminent ethnobotanist, ethnomycologist, cast a long shadow over the field of psychedelic studies, which retarded the investigation of entheogens in Christian art for half a century. We are here to turn that around, and I would ask Tom why he has distorted our findings by calling us disciples of Allegre, who he claims was discredited, which he was, because in our book, where we describe on page 217 how we are different from Allegro. So I ask you, Tom, as a friend and a colleague, why would you do this? Why would you call us discipule Allegre? I will come back. I have an idea of why Tom has done this. And Tom, I ask you to explain why. And if you do, I would welcome it. If you don't, Julie and I have our own hypothesis. Thank you.
Excellent. Paul Simon's name? Who? He brought up Panofsky, not from the 12th century, Waltz, not from the 12th century. Look, I like Paul Stamets a lot. He is not a medieval historian at all, and everything he's ever said on the topic of mushrooms and Christian art demonstrates that. So just like all of you, I didn't hear any evidence at all. I heard assertions, I heard special pleadings, arguments to authority that aren't even authorities in the field, but no corroborating evidence. So in a technical way, the debate is over. I have won. Congratulations to me. But since I have you here and you've sacrificed a perfectly serviceable Wednesday night, I'll just drive a few more death nails into this idea. Okay, the only reason Jerry and Julie are looking for psilocybe mushrooms is because they couldn't find any Amanita muscaria mushrooms. John Marco Allegro never said anything about psilocybe mushrooms. They've completely moved the goalpost. Okay, Jerry says I changed my mind. Yeah, you know why? Because I'm honest. That's why. Okay? I don't trust somebody that after they're shown they're wrong won't change their mind. How about any of you? So from the striking image at Plaincarl Chapel was birthed the idea that there must be other mushrooms hidden in Christian art. So for my rebuttal, I'm going to address some of the images Jerry showed you in his opening statement, and a few more. You see, I know Jerry just had his paper accepted by the journal. I just had a paper accepted by it too. And the thing is, had I been one of the peer reviewers of Jerry's article, it would not have passed at all. Okay, because every single image Jerry thinks is a mushroom, he says it's either psilocybe or Amanita, they actually fit into 6 easily identifiable categories of mistake that every medieval art historian on the planet is aware of. Mushroom advocates apparently don't know anything about this. So the most common mistake is the one we've already been over. They usually mistake the parasol victory for the mushroom. So like with this famous image from the Canterbury Psalter, we're supposed to believe that these are little mushrooms in there. You can still see the parasol top and the tassels hanging out the bottom. Come on, guys. Okay. While we're on the Canterbury Psalter, again, you could still see the parasols inside there. I've never seen Amanita that tall either. Okay, see, there's a problem here. If this was really supposed to represent the tree of knowledge of good and evil, why does it look just like every other tree when Eve and Adam have been kicked outside the garden? Shouldn't be something to set it off as maybe a little special? Well, no. Well, this brings us to our second category of mistake that they're all making, which is mistaking natural foliage for mushrooms. So, let's take, for example, let's get out of Christian art and go with some secular pieces. Here is Folio 8R, The Lore of the Tigris. This is a secular work, and these are exactly the kinds of trees that a holy mushroom advocate would call the Amanita muscaria. Right? But this is secular. Okay? Or what about these little critters here? Look, it even has a red top and it's on a white stem. So obviously the artist is telling us that this little weasel is going to eat the Amanita muscaria, have Jesus enlightenment, and go tell all the other critters about salvation, right? Obviously. No, this is just a style of tree. In fact, You can actually see from different kinds, from secular works and from religious works. They all have the same kind of style. The bulbous top, some branches holding up the sides. And I mean, look, you can even tell that these are really just these, because branches grow on trees, mushrooms do not. I don't know, Jerry said before that they do on some. I've never seen that before. See, the problem is, you need only go outside. This structure, this bulbous top on a long stem appears in nature. In fact, this week at a breaking convention, do me a favor, find me and be like, let me know how many trees you've seen between now and then that you're like, oh damn, if you were to outline that, it would look just like a mushroom. Now, the third category of mistake is over-enthusiasm to see a psychedelic mushroom where there is none. Take this mosaic from the Basilica de Apollo, which the Browns argue are Amanita muscaria mushrooms. But you see, I have a bit of a problem with this, because amanitas, as we all have those signature white flecks on them, right, on the caps. Okay. Now, clearly there were plenty of white tiles. Why did they move a few onto the top there, onto the cap? Well, because this artist was so precise in her mosaic, she's actually telling us exactly what kind of mushroom this is. You see the orange top, the yellow rim, and the yellow stem? What do you believe more? Your lying eyes? Or what somebody with no evidence is telling you? Let's see, what else? Here we go. Jerry brought up psilocybin mushrooms, and this is one of the images he uses from the Abbey of St. Savin. Now, like everyone else in this room, I have personally never seen a psilocybin mushroom that has protuberances growing out the bottom like that. Again, this is where actually knowing something about art history and not studying a completely discredited idea will serve to help. You see, this, just like the parasol of victory evolved over time, so did this design. You can see the fruits hanging out the bottom. These are really just coconut trees that he says were mushrooms, right? And you can see it here from Assyria again, and of course, with the great mosque of Damascus, you still have the fruit hanging out the bottom, and the top is almost taking on like a canopy, kind of dome, one might say a mushroom shape, and yet it's still a tree. In fact, you could just trace it all the way up to the Abbey of St. Savin. It's really simple if you actually know about art history. The fourth category of mistake is simply misunderstanding everyday objects from mushrooms. Jerry just did that when he said that the coal pressed to Isaiah's lips. Even though it says coal, it's really a mushroom. Okay, well, other times, and this isn't one of Jerry's images, but just to make you be aware of this and the mistake that they're making, so apparently those are supposed to be 3 mushrooms there that the angel is holding. Okay, but this image, like all these images, are very, very well known to Christian art historians. This is called the Arma Christi, which means the tools of the Passion. The tools of the Passion were those things associated with Jesus' crucifixion. Things like the flogging whip, right, that the Roman soldiers beat the shit out of him with, the dice that they rolled to gamble over his garments. Of course, there's the spear of Longinus, right, that gave Jesus the death blow. No crucifixion is complete without a cross, and to go with that cross, 3 nails. They're not mushrooms, they're nails. Now, another category mistake is not recognizing the cultural context of an image. We already saw how that could get you into trouble with playing pro, right? I brought up the actual context while Jerry kind of danced around it, danced around the time. Well, this happens in other places, like Jesus' entry into Jerusalem as it appears in the Cathedral of St. Martin de Vic, as Jerry just showed you before. Now, if you are unfamiliar with Christian lore, you are likely to miss the real message here, and you're probably going to mistake those for mushrooms. But this scene actually perfectly encapsulates, parasol symbolism. Okay, for starters, you can actually still see that there's a tassel line there. But this image is actually Christian lore derived from Mark's gospel. Mark's is the most political of the 4, and Mark was making a political point. You see, every year around the Passover, when this takes place, Jesus' entry, the Roman guard would also enter Jerusalem from the other side of the city. The Romans with their war horses and soldiers, and Jesus being contrasted with peasants riding a lowly donkey. The Roman soldiers have their parasols, and so does Jesus. And now, when Jerry says these are parasols at the top of the Temple of Jerusalem, this again, he's missing Jewish and Christian history. Everybody here that knows anything about Jewish history knows that the Sanhedrin, the high priest of the temple, was in bed with the Roman guard, right? Well, this is symbolically showing the end of that reign in the new covenant in Christ. That's what it's not mushrooms, they're taking down the parasols off the temple. Oh, let's see. Was that 2? Okay, and then the last and 6th category mistake are the truly ridiculous claims. Now, one holy mushroom advocate, John Rush, says that we have to look past what we can plainly see. He says that with Christian art, a tree is not a tree. This is a quote, by the way. A tree is not a tree. A rock is not a rock. We must look past the natural explanation to see a mushroom. Okay, that is just unfalsifiable, unscientific bullshit, and I'm not going to insult anyone's intelligence in this room by explaining for 1 second why that is unfalsifiable, unscientific bullshit. And so, by the way, is the idea that there's a mushroom going to Isaiah's lips. You should really read some Akkadian sources on that, Jerry. You'd know exactly what's going on if you did. Another thing that Rush says that's kind of ridiculous is this idea that there are mushrooms hidden in the folds of clothing. And I gotta say, it actually breaks my heart that Jerry fell for this too. Yeah, there are folds in here, okay? And John Rush also brings up this. Yeah, there's kind of a mushroom shape there, okay? But what about this woman's skirt? You get that same shape. Unless you're at a spandex convention, you're gonna see that kind of fold in clothing. But the next time you're at home, sitting on your toilet, look at the towels on your towel rack. They're probably making that shape. And that was all how much time do I have? 30 seconds. The reason I lumped Julie and Jerry in with the Discopuli Allegri is that I don't think Jerry has the same ideas as Allegro. I think Jerry's much smarter than John Allegro ever was. But there is a certain genus to that, okay? They're still saying the same things. They're still basing this off a discredited idea. Remember, John Mark Allegro said that
Tom classifies us with the discredited theories of Allegro. He cites a footnote indicating that he's talking about us, and this is simply untrue. And he says here's where he and the Allegro people part company. There is not one shred of evidence to suggest that medieval artists secretly signified entheogens as the fruit. He sets up a bogus straw man by referring to the Discipuli Allegri, a general term I use to refer to those who agree with the theories of John Marco Allegri, whose book, The Sacred Mushrooms and the Cross, argued that Christianity evolved out of a magic mushroom-eating sex cult. This is page 217 on our book. Talk about setting up false straw men. I know Tom is familiar with our work. He praises it. I hope he would read it before he puts the completely erroneous and false statement into print that we are disciples of Allegro. So I ask you again, Tom, because I have my own ideas, Julie and I do, which we will reveal in our conclusions, why do you do this? Why, as a scholar, do you distort and misquote our work, which throws doubt on a lot of what else you are saying, if you could make this kind of error, and if you've never submitted your work for peer review? Why reject the views of experts and authority? Why classify us this way? Why say there's not one shred of evidence when there obviously is? Now, Tom does not understand the anthropological perspective. He focuses it on cross-cultural, but he ignores the fact that it is, in essence, interdisciplinary. I've worked on multiple interdisciplinary projects. My main work has been in the area of renewable energy, studying nuclear power, and I've been involved 5 years before I came here in closing down nuclear power plants with other groups in California. I've worked with interdisciplinary teams, radiation physicists, epidemiologists, statisticians, measuring strontium-90 in baby tooth to show that the radiation coming out of nuclear power plants was contributing to our cancer epidemic. You do not have to be a master in all of these fields to draw on the work of others. And Tom makes this point that he is the eminent person who can read these texts. Well, Carl Rupp, classics professor at Boston University, who's written multiple books, including The Road to Eleusis, co-authored Persephone's Quest, wrote about the cult, that mushroom cult that civilized Europe, and also wrote The Effluence of Deity. He has integrated art history, ethnobotany, and classical scholarship to make the case that Tom refuses to see. Absence of evidence. Just because we had not yet discovered evidence in Scripture does not mean that it exists. Why, they just discovered 95 years later the presumed particle from the Big Bang. And they just recently discovered it. And because no one had found that evidence before, doesn't mean it did not exist. What about those indigenous people who haven't been contracted by the West? Can we categorically say there is never going to be any more? Because we haven't found it yet. As Tom and I do agree, and Tom did a marvelous job of pointing out how the apocalyptics, the Gnostics, and even the Orthodox Christians acknowledge use of entheogens. And his chapters there are really worth the price of that book, Psychedelic Mystery Traditions. And this is from Esdras 2. Now, what he drunk and what he took in, what we still need to find out, but it apparently was an entheogen. This is one of a quote that I presented in a paper on entheogens and the Gnostic Church. And obviously here, Jesus is saying, you became intoxicated from the bubbling spring, which I did measure out. I mean, we're talking about a dose here. This is obviously a reference to an entheogen. And what he's saying that he and whoever the person he's speaking to, Thomas, we've merged, we've had a transpersonal experience. Obviously not wine. Now, there is textual evidence, and Tom is absolutely wrong on that point, and that's his whole big point. Why, if the fathers of the church wrote about mandrake, wrote about cannabis, wrote about opium, why wouldn't they describe mushrooms? Well, here in Carl Rook's book with Mark Hoffman, Effluence of Deity, 2012, the Jewish mystic Abu Lafia talks about mushrooms as the key. And also, St. Augustine, who happens to know a little bit about Catholicism, was around in the 4th century, wrote in this document about mushrooms being part of the ritual experience. So there is evidence. Perhaps, and I humbly submit this, perhaps you just haven't found it yet, but Carl Rook has. And you cite Carl Rook in your book, and you should read what you cite. Hatsis on the church. He says, the one theogen with scriptural precedent. Well, if we're going to look at the literature, Dan McCurr, Mystery of Mana, on ergot in Exodus. Benny Shannon, Biblical Entheogens, a DMT component coming out of acacia tree, combined with Praganam Hamala, ayahuasca-like experience in the Middle East, and Danny Nenu, getting high with the Most High on multiple psychoactive components in the Bible. That article will also be in the special issue of the Journal of Psychedelic Studies. Now, Tom writes on 125 of his book, talking about why wouldn't they talk or have written about the use of pharmaca. And he points out magic was illegal in the Roman Empire, and such a thing could get a person crucified. Perhaps that's a reason why gospel authors did not write about Jesus' use of this pharmaca from Tom himself. How much more time, please? 3 minutes. Thank you. There's a very important point. I have some other examples here. This is from Hildesheim. Obviously, if this were the parasol of victory or the mystery tree, you wouldn't have one of the mushrooms in the ethnobotanist Giorgio Samarini's Saint-Sauvin type of mushroom broken off and everybody blaming each other. Here is the Jesse tree, the base of the Jesse tree, which is painted across the entire ceiling of St. Michael's Cathedral. It is absolutely magnificent, created some 200 years after the canonization of St. Bernard. And we're not talking about some maybe hippie priest cavorting off in the center of France. This is in the high holy places of Christendom. Bishop Bernard was the tutor to Otto III, the Holy Roman Empire. I do know, Julie and I do a little historical research, Tom. And he also became sainted by the Catholic Church. Oh, we don't want to get to those yet. So what I would like to say, and this thing about the parasols of victory, there is not one reference in the Church of St. Martin de Vic where I showed you Jesus entering. I'm not saying, or Julie and I are not saying, that that is absolutely a mushroom. that the angel is handing out to Isaiah to take into his mouth, but I'm saying it surely is not a burning coal. It is, or a fiery coal, as described in the Bible. And Isaiah, he was a prophet. He foresaw the coming of Jesus and the New Testament 700 years before the birth of Christ. So over on the images that I showed you, there's an image of a man holding a scroll, and he says, the prophet has spoken. So the prophet Isaiah has foreseen all of this, had foreseen this particular coming, and seen that entheogens were involved here in the Last Supper. So Tom has distorted what we've said. He's set up a false straw man by classifying us as disciples of Allegri, who we respect for having introduced, I've been one of the founders of the idea that there are entheogens at the roots of many religions, including Judaism and Christianity. He has made this entire argument of absence of evidence. I don't think Tom has found it yet. Other scholars, eminent classicists, have. And this is why Julie and I call for an interdisciplinary committee on psychedelic gospels, equivalent, if you'll pardon this, to the Dead Sea Scrolls, because this is a big issue if we can show that Christianity has a psychedelic history. Thank you.
Thank you seriously for being here. This means so much to Jerry, Julie, Eden, and myself. It really does. A couple things before I launch into my prepared remarks. Jerry, you have to read these texts in Latin. De moribus manicarum, which you cited as St. Augustine, they literally use the word boletus, which means edible mushroom. If you were talking about something psychoactive, you would have either called it agarico or something like a pharmaca. But he says literally the term that means edible mushroom, not psychedelic mushroom. So you got to read these in their original languages, everybody. The Zohar doesn't say anything about painting mushrooms in art. Now, I agree with Jerry that it does say that this guy was inspired by a mushroom. Absolutely. It doesn't say anything about painting them in art. He brought up Daniel Merker, Benny Shanoon, and Danny Nemu. All of them, I'm familiar with all their work. It's all speculation. They don't have any actual evidence in any of those. Simply read the text yourself. There's nothing in there. He ripped my quotes completely out of context about whether or not early Christians would write about Jesus' use of this stuff. Yeah, that's true. They probably wouldn't have. But later authors clearly did. You have to get on the timeline, man. Now, you brought up a whole bunch of, you said something about medieval scholars. I don't remember, but let me just say there's not a medieval scholar on the planet that agrees with the whole mushroom hypothesis. Not one. One last thing, I'm getting actually a little tired of hearing that I'm withholding evidence or covering anything up. Does anybody in this room believe that I've covered up or withheld evidence tonight? At all? No, I won't be upset. You can, no, of course not. Of course not. Give me a break. Carl Ruck has found zero evidence for mushrooms. Again, it's all speculation. I do agree with Jerry's take on early Gnosticism, so I don't know why it's brought up as a debate point. Anyway. In 1539, Nicholas Copernicus updated his Facebook status. It's actually a rare fact of history, but the internet existed in the 1500s. And so Mr. Copernicus made a Facebook post that read, I do believe, and my calculations doth convey, much to the contention of my peers, that we liveth not in a geocentric universe, but rather a heliocentric universe. And lo, 'tis true it is not the sun that revolveth around the earth, but rather the earth which revolveth aroundeth the sun. Well, you could imagine the comment thread. Every insult was thrown at this heretic for daring to use science to overturn pop culture consensus. You see, instead of listening to what Copernicus had to say, everybody just Googled their favorite opinions. And those Googled opinions made them feel very warm and fuzzy inside, like they knew the secret. They were in on the conspiracy. Of course the sun revolves around the earth. Of course it does. And Copernicus pleaded with them, saying, but you have to understand, all the information Google has accumulated, and certain psychedelic journals, up until this point, cannot account for these new discoveries. And the people looked at Copernicus with confusion, because they couldn't Google it. They couldn't understand it. Now, I'm not comparing myself to Nicholas Copernicus. I have much better hair. I am commenting on the way people consume information in the 21st century. We are actually living at a time when you can Google yourself into believing that the world is flat. So how do we combat this? How do we strike a blow against this rock of ignorance? So Jerry's fond of quoting Carl Sagan when Sagan says that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And obviously we didn't hear even ordinary evidence tonight. But I like Carl Sagan too. But my favorite quote is a little more involved. You see, it's less a quote and it's actually a method. And it's called the Baloney Detection Kit. And it's just 10 questions to ask yourself to adjudicate truth claims. Things like flat earth, reptilian overlords, and mushrooms in Christian art. So the first thing we want to ask ourselves is the source reliable? Well, one of the problems, Jerry said before that he wanted to write an academic book, Julie wanted to write an adventure story. You should have gone with the academic book because it makes it not a reliable source. On top of which, so much of this has been based off an idea that's already been completely discredited. Now, I have no doubt at all, I know Julie and Jerry very well. They have open minds and open hearts, and they attacked this question in that way. There's not a question about it. Okay, so I'd appreciate it if they stopped saying that I'm not. Okay? But the problem is they based this overall concept on total frauds, like John Rush and that idiot Jan Irvin. Okay? That is not a reliable source. Question number 2, does the source make similar claims? Well, yes, according to the Browns, not only are there mushrooms in Christian art, but also soma was the Amanita muscaria. By the way, my colleague, both of Jerry and my colleague, Chris Bennett, has destroyed that in his book, Cannabis and the Soma Solution. That debate is over. Soma was not the Amanita muscaria. You brought up people withholding evidence. Wasson actually did withhold evidence, and Chris Bennett dug it up. But not just soma, also the Kykeon and Eleusis was a mushroom. And Santa Claus is really based on mushrooms. By the way, if you want a complete annihilation of that theory, that's what I'm doing this Saturday. So come check it out. If you think Santa's based on the Amanita muscaria, you won't by Sunday. So according to Jerry, everything in the ancient world was a mushroom, and thereby bypasses the abundant evidence we have for cannabis, opium, mandrake, and henbit in the ancient world. Number 3, have the claims been verified by someone else? Well, no, not really. Jerry will list a number of people who agree with him, but none of them are biblical scholars, Christian art historians, New Testament historians, or anything. In fact, the only actual New Testament historian and historian of psychedelia that he spoke to was me, and he rejects my critiques. Question number 4, does this fit in with the way the world works? Does the holy mushroom fit in with how the world works? Now, I have 2 answers for this. There's a short answer and a bit of a long answer. The short answer is no. The long answer is fuck no. Question number 5. Has anyone tried to disprove this claim? Well, not really. Let's take an example from Julie and Jerry's book, and here I'm going to be paraphrasing. They walked into Plain Corral expecting to see a mushroom. They're discussing the art historian, I could say that word, Erwin Panofsky, and Panofsky's talking about 3 ways to place a piece of art in its cultural context. And Jerry says, again, I'm paraphrasing, well, the first thing you have to do is look at each piece devoid of any culture. Just see it for what it is. To which Julie replies, well, that's easy. It's obviously a naked man and a woman standing beside a large mushroom. But we all know now that it's not a mushroom. Okay? We all know that it's a combination of the parasol of victory and communion wafers, which, by the way, Jerry, we have tons of textual evidence for that. I don't know why you say we don't. I mean, there's plenty of it. At no point when they walked into Plain Corral did they even attempt to consider that that could be something else. The same holds true for every image Jerry just showed you. Number 6, where does the preponderance of evidence point? So this is actually where the lack of corroborating evidence gets really sticky. See, we can't even answer this question because the holy mushroom hypothesis is not even good enough to meet it. So we kind of have to skip it. So even if the Browns found 1 or 2 mushrooms that could be entheogenic mushrooms in Christian art, they would be washed over by the complete textual silence of this practice. 7, is the claimant playing by the rules of, in this case, history? No. The Psychedelic Gospels, as Jerry said, is a reliable work of anthropology. But this is a historical question, and you have to use the tools of history to answer it. Jerry himself in his book writes that as an anthropologist, he likes to ask the locals how they feel about pieces of art. You see, they think that by asking people alive today, that you can gain insight to people that lived 700 years ago. No historian on the planet thinks that. That is anachronism written all over it. I mean, come on. Like, I'd love to ask the painters of Plain Corral what their intentions were. But I can't do that. So I have to look at cultural clues that existed at the time it was created, which you notice Jerry did not do once. This is not a knock against anthropology as a discipline. I can't use history to fix a car engine. There are different modes of finding the truth. 7. Is the claimant providing positive evidence? Well, not at all. When Jerry says the mushroom was too sacred to write about, or Argood and Watson had to sign non-disclosure agreements, or the absence of evidence is just evidence of isn't evidence of absence, these are all clever ways of saying, I got nothing, man. But please, just believe it's a mushroom. Those are just ways of saying, I don't have evidence. They're what we call negative evidence. They're just assertions. You need one piece of corroborating evidence. And I'm sorry, but the Zohar and St. Augustine's work are not those things. You've mistranslated them, my friend. I'm sorry. Does the new theory account for as many phenomena as the old theory? Not at all. Jerry takes a few anomalies that can't be explained and says, here, this is my theory. But does that explain 2,000 years of Christian history? Not to anybody that studies Christian history. Finally, are personal beliefs driving the claim? Yes. Jerry mentioned before his acid trips at the Rainbow Gathering in Colorado. Okay? Like me, Jerry is an advocate of cognitive liberty and the right for each of us to use the medicines of our choice, and I commend him for that. I'm right there with him. We all need to be loud and proud about this. This is our God-given right to use these medicines, and I appreciate Jerry for being a loud voice on that. However, unlike me, his beliefs are clearly driving his claims. My beliefs do not. Look, I'd love for there to be mushrooms in Christian art. I don't have anything against this. I have a problem with the lack of evidence for it. Okay? In fact, I've already disproved several of the images Jerry showed you tonight in the past, and he still presents them as if he's never heard of this. That's an ideology, people. You stop being a scholar when you do that, and you become an ideologue. In short, the holy mushroom fails all 10 of Mr. Sagan's safeguards against untrue claims. Now, how much time do I have? Perfect. I want you all, if you wouldn't mind, to close your eyes and imagine, you don't have to close them, but just imagine for one moment that you are sitting in a court of law. You are on trial for double rape and homicide, a crime you absolutely did not commit. That's not the person you are. You get kitty cats out of the trees when they're stuck, you help find lost dogs, you help elderly cross the street with groceries. That's who you are. You're a good person. You don't even kill insects in your house. You catch them in cups and you put them outside. And here you sit, on trial, in the defendant's seat, waiting for the hammer of judgment to come down on you. You've been sitting in jail now for months, rotting away, waiting for this day. And all I ask you is one question. On that day, would you want the arbiters of justice to employ Jerry's standard of evidence or my standard of evidence? There are no mushrooms in Christian art. There's not 100, there's not 50, there's not 20, 10, 5, or 1. As a very wise man once said, thank you all for listening. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
There are other images in our book, and I invite you to look at that. On Sunday, I will make an in-depth presentation of our findings, and I stress again that as an interdisciplinary scholar, I go into art history, I draw on philologists, I draw on ethnobicologists. So there is a compelling group of people who support this particular work, and I don't know if that's a parasol of victory. I don't think so. I don't think it's a paradise tree. It's an Amanita muscaria. Here's an interesting one from the great Canterbury Psalter, composed about 1180 in the scriptorium where they made illuminated Bibles at Canterbury. And here's Jesus healing the leper. And Jesus says, I'm not going to quote this directly, but I had it translated by a Latin scholar, may I heal you? And the leper is saying, yes, I would like to be cleansed. But his scroll is not going to Jesus, it's going to this psilocybin-like mushroom at the base. This is the conversion of St. Eustace. We found mushroom images in 7% of the 174 stained glass windows at Chartres Cathedral. And here's the conversion of St. Eustace. Mushroom images and the cross replacing the tree coming out of the stag's ear. We explain this in depth in our book. We are not here to, as Allegro was, admittedly so, to discredit anyone's belief in Catholicism. We are here to reveal a mystery we think is at the roots of many indigenous and classical and even contemporary religions. And we quote Brother David Stendhal-Ross in our book. If we can encounter God through a sunrise seen from a mountaintop, why not through a mushroom, prayerfully ingested? We know that ayahuasca usage in Santo Daime and in the UDV is approved by the Brazilian Council of Bishops. We know it took the Catholic Church 300 years to apologize to Galileo. We hope that the Catholic Church will come around to recognizing its own psychedelic history. And I know Tom and I would love to get into the bowels of the Vatican to see what text and what images are there. And we think that with the work, this is much bigger than this debate, if psychedelics have a place in Christian history. And we believe that with Michael Pollan's work has opened up a door because Richard Dreher, a staunch Catholic and the editor of an American conservative, a Catholic journal, has opened up a new dialogue about psychedelics with Catholics. And we cite that in the journal article. So not admitting or even considering the mushroom issue yet at this time, but saying we know that mushrooms can create a mystical experience. We know that they can now be used for healing. We as Catholics should be concerned about these things and should be open to that particular discussion. We believe that this debate, going back to the ghosts of Allegro and Wasson, has much broader implications. We believe we have definitively, after half a century, resolved the Wasson-Allegro controversy and understood why Wasson went through such twists and turns, just as Tom has done. First saying that plain coral was a tree. Then it was an apple. No, that doesn't quite hold up. Then it's about the fall. No, it's not about the tree itself or what the plant was. It's about the fall. Well, that is, as we call it in cultural relativism, another part of the anthropological perspective, that's putting a New Testament interpretation on a Genesis myth that was written approximately 1500 BC. Cultural relativism means we need to suspend our judgments when we see something like Aztec cannibalism, and we understand that the Aztecs devastated the protein supply of the Valley of Mexico, and they turned to eating their neighbors. We don't say it's good, but as anthropologists, we try to understand that, just as we try to understand the Garden of Eden myth without the veil of New Testament fall or parasols or mystery.